All right, let's jump right in. We're going to take a look back at a really pivotal time in tech history, that 2025 to 2026 period. And this wasn't just about AI getting better at talking. Nope. This was the year AI learned how to do things. We're talking about the jump from just chatting to taking real action. And believe me, it kicked off a revolution and a war. And this quote? It just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? This is the core idea of everything we're talking about today. The whole expectation just flipped on its head. We stopped asking things like, what's the best hotel? And started saying, book me the best hotel. It sounds like a small change in words, but in terms of technology, it was a massive, seismic shift. So here's our game plan. We'll start with how this doing AI even came to be. Then we'll meet the three big players who really got the ball rolling. We'll dissect why this revolution happened when it did. Then we get to the really juicy part, this super app siege. We'll see how the industry went from chaos to cooperation. And finally, what it all means to have a true AI partner. Okay, let's get into it. The dawn of doing AI. For years we had chatbots, and they were cool, right? Great for getting info, summarizing articles, that kind of thing. But the actual work? Well, that was still all on us. This period is the exact moment that whole equation completely flipped. This slide just lays it all out so perfectly. The old way, man, it was a pain. It was all this back and forth. You ask, the AI answers, then you have to go and do the thing yourself. So much friction, not a lot of action. But the new way, it's a straight shot. You just say what you want, and boom, it gets done. Zero friction. They called it the cyber butler model. And get this, it was so good that some users were saving up to 2 hours on their commutes just by automating their bookings. Wow. So who were the trailblazers here? Who actually made all this happen? Well, it was three key products that just exploded onto the scene and pretty much defined this entire era. And we're not just talking about new apps. These were entirely new ways of thinking about what AI could actually do for us. And here they are, the big three. First, you had Manus, this web action engine that went completely viral. I mean, 1 million users in its first week. Insane. At the same time, the Doubao AI phone created this absolute hardware frenzy, selling out in just 24 hours. And then, for the office folks, there was Claude CoWork, which let people who weren't even coders automate all sorts of complex tasks. Each one targeted a different market. But together, man, they created the perfect storm. But that kind of begs the question, right? Why then? Why did all of this suddenly blow up in 2025? Well, it definitely wasn't a coincidence. It was this perfect mix of new tech, some seriously smart marketing, and the fact that, honestly, we were all just ready for something better from our devices. It really boils down to three main things. First, the tech itself was finally good enough to pull it off. Second, the marketing was just brilliant, creating this huge buzz and making everyone feel like they had to have it. And third, let's be real, we were all just tired of endless clicking and tapping. We were craving a results-first kind of world. So let's peek under the hood for a sec. How does this stuff actually work? Imagine you say, book me a hotel in Tokyo. First, the AI breaks that down into smaller steps. Then, and this is the really cool part, it actually navigates the apps on your screen, kind of like a ghost user, clicking and swiping for you. Finally, it handles the payment and confirms the booking. And just like that, it's done. You barely had to lift a finger. But great tech isn't the whole story. The marketing here was just genius. Manus put out this 4-minute demo that just blew up online. People were literally trading invite codes for thousands of dollars. And Doubao? They called their first batch technical previews, which made them feel super exclusive. Scalpers were selling them for 12,000 RMB. It all led to this legendary tagline for the phone that was banned for being too smart. I mean, come on, that's pure marketing gold. And you know what? That tagline? It wasn't just hype. Which brings us to the most dramatic part of this whole story, the super app siege. Because the Doubao AI phone didn't just release a cool new gadget. Oh no. It basically declared war on the entire mobile ecosystem. And the ecosystem? It fought back. Hard. So this is it. The phone that kicked everything off, the Doubao AI phone. And its promise was so simple, but so incredibly powerful. You could just say, order me the cheapest milk tea, and it would go off on its own, open different delivery apps, find the best price, order it, and pay for it. The whole cyber butler dream was suddenly real. And people went absolutely wild for it. 30,000 units, gone. Instantly on day one. It became one of the top trending topics online.
This was way more than just a good launch. People were calling it a Jarvis moment. You know that feeling like a real conversational AI from the movies had finally shown up in the real world? But here's the catch. There was a pretty controversial secret to its magic. This agent layer, the phone's AI, basically sat on top of all your other apps. It would just intercept what you wanted and do it for you, completely skipping the app's normal screens and ads. So to the big tech companies, this wasn't some cool innovation. They saw it as a traffic heist. Their billion-dollar apps were being turned into invisible background tools, and that was a huge, huge threat to their business.
And the reaction? Whoa. It was fast and it was brutal. Check out this timeline. December 1st, the phone launches, sells out. Just 2 days later, bam, the blockade begins. People's phones started showing environment abnormal errors because the big apps figured out what was happening and started blocking them. By December 6th, less than a week after launch, it was over. The developer, ByteDance, had to disable the feature. And you can see the impact right there. The scalper's price crashed from 12,000 RMB all the way down to 4,800. The siege worked. But that's not where the story ends. Because that crazy, dramatic conflict, it actually forced everyone to grow up a little bit. It pushed the whole industry to move past this Wild West free-for-all phase and figure out a way to actually work together. So the industry had to find a fix. What they were doing, this screen hacking method, it just wasn't sustainable. It was messy, unreliable, and kept setting off fraud alerts. The real fix was to move to standardized APIs. The best way to think about it is this. Instead of the AI sneaking in through a back window, it now knocks on the front door with an official key. And that new model meant everyone could cooperate and even share the revenue.
So what happened to our three protagonists? Well, they all had to adapt. Manus is trying to become a huge global platform, probably hoping to get bought by one of the tech giants. Claude CoWork is digging deep, integrating itself right into operating systems like Windows and Mac. And Doubao? They're planning a comeback, but this time they're doing it by the book, partnering with big hardware makers to make sure their next phone is totally legit from day one.
So after all that chaos and innovation, where does that leave us? Well, we've basically walked into a whole new reality, the era of the AI partner. But with all this new power comes a ton of new, really complex and urgent questions that we have to answer. And these are the big ones we really need to think about. First, privacy. Your AI is doing everything for you, even looking at your bank account. So who owns that data? Then there's the job market. What happens to junior roles when an AI can build a whole piece of software in just 10 days? And finally, regulation. Governments are starting to wake up to this, and new rules are definitely on the way to try and manage this brave new world. When you boil it all down, this is the massive shift we're all living through. For our entire lives, computers have been about point and click. Well, that era is ending. The new era is simply speak and done. And that's really the most important thing to take away from all of this. It's so easy to look at what happened to the Doubao phone and call it a failure, but it wasn't a failure at all. It was the first necessary battle in a much bigger revolution, a revolution against the interface itself. In this new world, you don't go to an app anymore. The app is just a tool working in the background, managed by your own personal AI partner. Which leaves us with one final critical question to think about. As we hand over more and more of the doing to our AI agents, and they start acting on our behalf with real autonomy, we have to ask ourselves, who is ultimately in control?